Hey guys, it's Danny. So it has been about a month since I stopped using the rain mix and started to use that fertilizer that has an organic component, meaning seaweed. So it's time to make an update, and I have to say things really are starting to look better. I'm so happy. I was so stressed about this, you have no idea. But things are starting to go better. However, I do have some observations, and to wrap up the subject forever, really, because I don't want to deal with it again, I'll tell you my conclusions and my experience, tell you how the new fertilizer works and how the orchids are bouncing back. So in case you don't know the problems that I had, you can visit the description down below and you can see all the history. I'm not going to insist on it. Let's just do this very fast. So as I was saying, things are starting to bounce back in the sense that roots have started to grow without burning, finally. I still have some issues here and there, but I'll tell you more about it. So let's give you a close-up. So this is how a burned root looked like. If you can see right here, the tip has just stopped growing all of a sudden. However, ever since I switched, I do see more and more tips growing continuously and not stopping growth. And here is a better close-up. Of course, things are moving slow. It only has been a month, but I am definitely seeing progress. Let's take another one. Okay. The Encyclia cardigeras were very affected by this, and I just had to put this orchid down to properly show you. So here we have quite a lot of roots that suffered a lot during the past 3 months. You can see that all the tips have burned. I don't have one single good root on this orchid. However, ever since I switched to the other fertilizer, you can see a growing root tip here, one over here. They don't seem to be affected. Oh, another one there. That's nice. So yeah, they're starting to grow definitely. Here's another good example. I was telling you in those videos that mostly the aerial roots, or actually the roots that are exposed to air, are most affected no matter what surface they touch. And here's an example. You can see some root burn there, but lately there has been no more root burn. You can see that the root tips are actually green, they're growing, so things are starting to return to normal. This is the Selaginea usitana. Again, I had all of the root tips burned on this orchid, as you can see. However, I do have one little root that is now growing really nicely. The root tip is still green. Anyway, this is basically the story with all of them. And to give you an update on what happened to the test orchid, because I did a test, here we go. It's actually pretty obvious. This was the root treated with rain mix. I did not treat them with anything ever since. I just let them dry and I just watered everything else. Water doesn't really touch these roots. So this is the root treated with the rain mix. The tip is burnt. It's completely gone. This is the root treated with pure osmosis water growing in the back there. And this is the root treated with the new fertilizer, which I used at a much larger strength. And as you can see, they're perfectly fine, except for the rain mix root. So things are pretty clear to me at this point. However, this doesn't really mean that I don't have any more burnt root tips. I'll tell you why. Do you see this tip right here? It burned simply because it touched a sheath. And I noticed this with a lot of my orchids. If a root touches a very absorbent part of the orchid, not necessarily medium or pot, it can be a sheath, an old root stump, something that is really absorbent and keeps the salt built up there, it will probably burn. So for this reason, it's not enough for me to just switch fertilizers. I really need to soak all of my orchids and to remove whatever residue is left. And this takes quite a while because I don't have enough osmosis water. It takes quite a lot of time. Anyway, I intend to soak everybody, and hopefully whatever residue remains will just be flushed away. So I did start to flush my orchids and soak them with tap water sometimes because, again, I don't have enough osmosis water, but tap water really doesn't affect them if I just use it sparingly. However, I did soak a few orchids in pure osmosis water just to check the buildup, and there is really no buildup. I have about 30 parts per million buildup, which is really insignificant. So from this, I drew the conclusion that it's not necessarily the quantity of salts in general that is affecting the roots. It might actually be a particular type of salt or one of the components that is stronger than other components, probably. And I also reached to the conclusion that it wasn't necessarily because I misused the product, although this might have sped up some things. It's simply because the product doesn't agree with how I water my orchids and how I grow them. This experiment was done with a brand new batch. I used it as correctly as I could according to the instructions I was given, and still I had the same result. So I personally believe that the rain mix is not suited for environments where roots can dry up faster. And given that I am a home grower, my setup, even though I call it a greenhouse, it's not necessarily a greenhouse. I cannot hose everything down, so I still water like a home grower would. So being that I'm a home grower and the vast majority of my viewers are home growers, I suspect that this fertilizer might not give the desired results. I suspect though that it would help if we flush our orchids. However, the rain mix claims that it doesn't need flushing. Well, I think that's a bit optimistic. It might not need flushing in a greenhouse where flushing actually occurs anyway if you hose everything down. However, in a normal home, if you use this product, I do suggest you flush. Bumblebee gave me the idea that when you fertilize, only fertilize from the bottom. Don't fertilize the aerial roots. Another viewer told me that after you fertilize, you can actually spray with some clean water to remove the residue. So there are some viable options you can perform to avoid the salt accumulation and possibly some root problems. However, overall, I simply don't feel this fertilizer is meant for home growing conditions. So for this reason, I personally cannot recommend it unless you are very, very careful. I just believe there are much safer fertilizers on the market, even though not as good when it comes to composition, because I have to give it to Rain Mix. It has a nice composition, except the sulfur, but that's just my own opinion. But since we're talking about alternatives, let's go see the other fertilizer. And here's the one that I've been using in the past month without any burns, without any trouble. However, I do have a problem with this one. Side note, in the collaboration that we did with Zane, you can watch it here if you didn't, it's very funny. When he imitated me, he said something like, "Hi guys, it's Danny. Alrighty, we might have a problem." Yeah, I always have problems. I think I'm too pretentious with stuff. So here's the fertilizer, and we have a problem. There is a lot of salt buildup here. This is my fault, I'll tell you. But most importantly, we have some mold. I don't know if you can actually see, there are tiny white specks. This is mold, but this is totally my fault, and I'll tell you why. So when I did the experiment with the 3 roots on my orchids, I used this one on a daily basis for 7 days. Plus I used it when I fertilized my other orchids. I opened this cap every single day. Sometimes even multiple times, and sometimes I just left the cap on the table, rushed to install my camera to film and stuff like that. Anyway, I let this get too much air, and I also left this accumulate on the lid here. Not okay. So I just had to go and purchase another one. And I'll try to be more careful with this one. If I see salt accumulating, I think it's a good idea to remove it so that the bottle doesn't accumulate air inside and doesn't favor the formation of mold. So a little bit of bad news, but it's also good news, because if anybody ever doubted this fertilizer had something organic in it, doubt no more. It definitely does, and it definitely molds. However, I'm not gonna throw this away, although I don't have much left. I used it so much actually. I will use it on my potted plants on the terrace because I don't think any mold will survive exposed to the intense heat and the blazing sun, so it should be okay. But keep in mind, with anything that has an organic component, just make sure that you don't forget the lid off the container and let it sit like that for a few hours. Not a good idea. Also make sure it closes properly. So yeah, I'm giving this one another chance. But when it comes to the actual benefits that it provided to my orchids, well, I cannot really say anything. I mean, sure, my orchids are growing nice roots at the moment, but they did that with the rain mix as well. The problem was the roots were burning. So I cannot really say at the moment if kelp actually improved the quality or actually the quantity of roots. I think it's a bit too early to tell, so I just need to test it further. However, I can tell you that it definitely doesn't burn. But of course, salts will accumulate in time. How fast? It only depends on the environment, perhaps. Also on the orchid, so flushing is never a bad idea. You might not need to do it every week or every month, but it's a good idea to perform it in any case. And this is about it. I think things are starting to return to normal. Things are starting to grow again. So I'm hopeful for the future, but I am still looking for a better fertilizer than the one I'm using. I'm not yet sure if an organic component in the fertilizer is suited for my setup, my inorganic medium. If it does indeed turn out it's not suited, I need to switch fertilizer, and I really am thinking of purchasing the MSU fertilizer. Problem is, I need to order it from the USA. But if I have no choice, I do want to try that one out, at least to see if my setup and the way I grow my orchids has an incompatibility with powder fertilizers in general, or it just didn't work so well with one of them. The MSU is slightly different, that's why I want to try it out as well. If it turns out that one will burn my roots as well, then it's pretty clear my setup is incompatible with powder fertilizers, and that's a shame because liquid fertilizers are really not economical. However, I will do with what I have. So alrighty guys, thank you for watching this. This was the final update on the situation. Things are starting to go well and hopefully will be smooth sailing from here on. Of course, what I just shared with you is my own experience, my conclusions based on what I experienced, and it's always up to you to try things out for yourself, research for yourself, and make the decision yourself. So okay, if you'd like to watch more orchid videos from me and stay up to date, simply subscribe to my channel. I post on a daily basis. Always feel free to leave me comments down below if you have questions or suggestions for videos. I always read my comments, and always feel free to send me a letter at the address you see on the screen or in the description below. Choose an option on the screen if you'd like to be directed to orchidnature.com or watch another orchid video. Thank you for joining. I'll see you all next time. Bye!